The forests of eastern Latvia had always been a place of mystery. Villagers whispered of ancient spirits and cursed paths, warning their children never to wander too deep. But recently, those warnings took on a grim urgency. 10 children from 3 small villages near the Abalov forest had disappeared within 2 months, vanishing without a trace. Detective Elric Graves arrived in the village of Rudzadi on a cold, overcast morning. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, and a pervasive silence blanketed the town. He had been called in after local authorities admitted they were out of their depth. Standing by the edge of the forest, Graves adjusted his coat against the chill. The villagers who had gathered behind him were reluctant to meet his gaze, their faces pale with fear. One man, a hunter named Edgars, stepped forward reluctantly. "The forest has taken them," he said. Graves turned, his piercing eyes narrowing. "The forest, or something in it?" Edgars hesitated. "There's a hut, deep in the woods. My father told me stories of it when I was a boy. They say it walks on chicken legs, and that an old witch lives there." Graves raised an eyebrow. "Baba Yaga." The name seemed to ripple through the crowd, sparking hushed whispers and uneasy glances. At the village hall, Graves reviewed the case files. The children ranged in age from 6 to 12, their disappearances spread across 3 villages bordering the forest. Each case followed a similar pattern: the child had gone missing during the late afternoon or evening, with no witnesses to their abduction. "What do the families say?" Graves asked Constable Carlos, the local officer assigned to assist him. "They're too scared to talk," Carlos replied, his tone bitter. "Half of them are convinced it's the witch, the other half blame each other." Graves frowned. He'd encountered legends like Baba Yaga before, ancient, powerful, and deeply ingrained in folklore. But whether the stories were metaphor or reality, something tangible had taken those children. "Take me to the most recent site," Graves said, standing abruptly. The constable led Graves to a small clearing deep in the forest, where a boy named Tomas had vanished 3 days earlier. His mother had found his shoes abandoned in the grass, their laces neatly tied. Graves knelt by the spot where the shoes had been discovered, scanning the area with a practiced eye. The ground was soft from recent rain, yet there were no tracks leading away from the clearing, only faint impressions of what might have been clawed feet. "Any strange smells reported?" Graves asked, brushing his fingers over the ground. Carlos hesitated. "A few. Some villagers said they smelled burnt wood near the forest edge the night Tomas disappeared. Others said, something rotten." Graves straightened, his expression grim. The combination of missing children, clawed tracks, and a lingering smell suggested something ancient and unnatural. "It's hunting," he murmured. That evening, Graves returned to the village, intent on speaking with the families of the missing children. He met with Anna, a woman whose daughter, Milda, had vanished weeks earlier. Anna's home was modest, its walls adorned with embroidered tapestries and icons of saints. She clutched a small wooden doll as she recounted the day Milda disappeared. "She was playing outside," Anna said, her voice trembling. "She ran to the edge of the forest, and I called for her to come back. She said she heard a woman singing." Graves' brow furrowed. "Singing?" Anna nodded. "A strange song. I couldn't hear it clearly, but Milda said it sounded inviting." Graves took note of the detail. Luring children with songs was a hallmark of many supernatural legends, including Baba Yaga. As he rose to leave, Anna gripped his arm. "Wait," she said, pulling a small object from her pocket. "I found this by the forest the morning after she vanished." It was a fragment of bone, carved into the shape of a bird's claw. Graves studied it carefully. "This isn't local craftsmanship," he said. "It's something older." The following day, Graves sought out Edgars, the hunter who had spoken of the witch's hut. Edgars was reluctant to talk but eventually agreed to guide Graves deeper into the forest. As they trudged through the dense trees, Edgars spoke in a low voice. My father told me the hut moves, appearing wherever the witch wants it to. But it always leaves signs, burned trees, strange markings. What kind of markings? Graves asked. Symbols carved into bark, Edgar's replied. Spirals, stars, things that don't make sense. The description reminded Graves of the bird claw charm Anna had shown him. If we find these signs, will you show me? Edgar's hesitated, then nodded. But be careful, detective. If the stories are true, she doesn't just take children. She devours those who get in her way. Hours later, they found the first sign. A massive oak stood in a small clearing, its trunk blackened as though scorched by fire. Around its base were more bone charms, some hanging from branches, others scattered on the ground. Graves crouched to examine the tree, noting the strange symbols carved into its bark. They were ancient and unfamiliar, their meaning elusive. This is recent, he said, running his fingers over the markings. She's been here. Edgar shifted nervously, glancing around the clearing. If the hut's nearby, we should leave. Graves straightened, his expression determined. Not until we find it. That night, Graves camped near the forest edge, determined to observe any unusual activity. As the hours stretched on, the woods grew eerily quiet, the usual sounds of insects and rustling leaves fading into silence. Then, faintly, he heard it, a soft, haunting melody drifting through the trees. It wasn't human, yet it carried an unsettling beauty that sent shivers down his spine. Graves rose, his hand resting on the iron dagger he carried for protection. He followed the sound deeper into the forest, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The song grew louder, guiding him to a narrow path that wound through the trees. At the end of the path, he saw a faint glow, a fire burning in the distance. Detective Elric Graves moved cautiously, each step muffled by the soft, damp earth. The haunting melody grew louder, wrapping around him like a cold wind, compelling him forward. The glow ahead flickered like firelight, but it was no ordinary flame, it shifted between hues of orange, green, and violet. The path opened into a clearing, and there it was. A crooked hut stood in the center, perched on grotesque chicken legs. The walls were made of warped wood, bones tied with sinew dangling from its edges like wind chimes. The strange firelight emanated from within, casting distorted shadows that danced across the clearing. Graves crouched behind a tree, his breath shallow. The hut was straight out of legend, yet here it was, a chilling reality. The song stopped abruptly, leaving a heavy silence. Then, the legs of the hut creaked, shifting slightly as if the structure were aware of his presence. Graves tightened his grip on the iron dagger at his side. Time to meet the witch, he muttered under his breath. As Graves stepped into the clearing, the hut's door swung open with a groan. Warm light spilled out, revealing a cluttered interior filled with jars, dried herbs, and twisted shapes he couldn't immediately identify. From the shadows emerged a figure, a hunched old woman with wild gray hair, her face a labyrinth of wrinkles. She carried a crooked staff, her black eyes gleaming with an unsettling intelligence. "So, a hunter comes to my door," she rasped, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "But you're no fool with a bow, are you? No, you're something else." Graves met her gaze, unflinching. 10 children are missing. I want them back." Baba Yaga cackled, a sound that sent the nearby trees trembling. Straight to the point. How refreshingly bold. "But why should I give them to you? What will you offer in return?" Graves stepped closer, his iron dagger glinting in the firelight. "I didn't come to make a deal. I came to end this." The witch's expression darkened, her smile fading. "You think you can challenge me? Foolish, foolish man." With a wave of her staff, the clearing darkened, the light from the hut extinguished. Graves felt the ground shift beneath him, and suddenly the forest seemed alive, closing in around him. Graves found himself standing in complete darkness, the air thick and stifling. Whispers echoed around him, voices of children calling for help, mingled with sinister laughter. "You cannot save them," Baba Yaga's voice hissed, disembodied and omnipresent. "Their fear is mine to feast upon." Graves steadied his breathing, gripping the iron dagger tightly. He had faced entities like this before, creatures that thrived on fear, twisting reality to break their prey. "You're nothing without your tricks," he said aloud, his voice cutting through the whispers. "Show yourself." The whispers stopped. A moment later, a small, trembling figure appeared in the darkness, a boy, no older than 8, his face pale and tear-streaked. "Help me," the boy whimpered. Graves took a step toward him, but the boy recoiled, his eyes wide with terror. "She'll take you too." Before Graves could respond, the boy dissolved into mist, leaving behind only the sound of his sobs. "You see?" Baba Yaga's voice taunted. "Their fear is eternal. You cannot break it." Graves steadied himself, remembering a crucial detail from folklore. Names held power, especially over creatures like Baba Yaga. If he could learn her true name, the one buried in ancient legends, he might be able to weaken her hold. "You're afraid of me, aren't you?" Graves called out, his voice echoing through the darkness. "That's why you hide behind shadows. What's your name, witch?" The forest trembled, and Baba Yaga's voice sharpened with anger. "You think names can bind me, hunter? Foolish mortal. You'll learn soon enough that I am the forest, the fear, the night itself." Graves smirked, his confidence growing. "A lot of words for someone who hasn't killed me yet." The darkness began to shift, revealing flashes of the clearing. Graves caught glimpses of the hut's chicken legs moving erratically, as if struggling against an unseen force. "You've tied yourself to this place," he muttered. "To the hut. If I destroy your anchor." The clearing reappeared fully, the forest retreating as Graves' defiance pushed back Baba Yaga's influence. The witch stood by her hut, her expression furious. "You think you understand my power," she spat. "I was old before your kind learned to speak. I will not be undone by a mere man." Graves moved quickly, his eyes locking onto the charms and bones dangling from the hut's edges. They were etched with the same symbols he had seen on the burned tree and the bone claw from Anna. "These are your wards," Graves said, slashing at one of the charms with his iron dagger. The charm shattered, and the hut groaned, its legs buckling slightly. Baba Yaga screamed, her voice a mixture of rage and pain. "You dare!" Graves didn't stop. He moved around the hut, cutting down the charms one by one. Each time, the witch grew weaker, her form flickering like a dying flame. As the final charm fell, a strange wind swept through the clearing. The firelight inside the hut extinguished, replaced by a soft, ethereal glow. From the shadows, the missing children emerged, their faces pale but alive. They stumbled toward Graves, their expressions dazed. "You've broken her hold," a girl whispered, clutching Graves' arm. "She can't keep us anymore." Baba Yaga let out a piercing shriek, collapsing to her knees. Her once fearsome form withered, her skin turning gray and brittle like tree bark. "This isn't over, hunter," she hissed. "I will return." Graves leveled his iron dagger at her. "Not while I'm alive." With that, the witch crumbled into ash, her hut groaning one last time before collapsing in on itself. Graves led the children back to the village, their steps slow but steady. When they emerged from the forest, the villagers ran to meet them, tears of relief streaming down their faces. Constable Carlos approached Graves, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. You actually did it." Graves nodded, exhaustion etched into his features. "The forest won't take them anymore. But keep an eye on its edge. Some evils never stay buried for long." As Graves prepared to leave Rudzati, the villagers gathered to thank him. They built a small shrine at the forest's edge, adorned with candles and carved charms to honor the children and ward off future darkness. Edgar's approached him, his usual stoicism replaced with a rare smile. You gave us hope, detective. If she returns, we'll be ready. Graves tipped his hat. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. With that, he set off down the dirt road, the whispers of the forest fading behind him. Yet, in the stillness of his thoughts, he knew Baba Yaga's words weren't an empty threat. Somewhere, in some dark corner of the world, she was waiting to rise again. As Detective Elric Graves left the village of Rudzadi behind, the forest seemed to watch him, its dark canopy stretching like a veil over the path. The children had been saved, the villagers were safe, for now. But the witch's parting words echoed in his mind, I will return. That night, as he camped by a small stream, the air grew colder than expected. The crackling of his fire seemed to distort, shifting to an almost musical rhythm. It was faint, but unmistakable, a distant hum, like a fragment of the eerie song that had lured the children. Graves rose to his feet, scanning the trees beyond the firelight. You can't haunt me, witch, he said aloud, his voice firm. You've lost. The hum stopped, replaced by silence. Yet, as he sat back down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching him. The following days brought Graves to Riga, where he planned to rest before taking on his next case. But even in the bustling streets of the capital, he felt a shadow hanging over him. One evening, as he sat in a small cafe, he overheard a conversation that froze him in his seat. Another child vanished near the forest, a man whispered to his companion. But they say the witch is gone. Graves leaned over. What forest are you talking about? The man hesitated, then pointed eastward. The forests near Kroslova. It's strange, no one saw anything, but they found the same markings. Like claws. Graves' heart sank. He had dismantled Baba Yaga's wards, weakened her power, but had he truly destroyed her? Or had she simply moved to another hunting ground? Graves didn't rest long in Riga. Instead, he traveled east to the outskirts of Kroslova, where another child had gone missing. The village there was smaller than Rudzadi, its people even more fearful. The child's father, a man named Viktors, described how his daughter had disappeared. She was playing near the stream, he said, his hands trembling. I heard her scream, but when I got there, nothing. Only her doll. Viktors handed Graves the doll, a simple, handmade toy with one arm torn off. Graves examined it carefully. The tear wasn't natural, the fabric had been ripped with sharp, claw-like precision. Did anyone hear anything else? Graves asked. Viktors nodded. A voice, a woman's voice, calling her name. Graves' jaw tightened. The witch wasn't gone, she was rebuilding her power. In Kroslova, Graves met an elderly woman named Ilse who claimed to know the legends of the area. She lived in a small, cluttered hut filled with jars of dried herbs and strange symbols scratched into the wooden walls. She's not bound to one place, Ilse said, her voice heavy with age. The forest is her domain, wherever it grows. Graves frowned. Then how do I stop her for good? Ilse studied him for a moment, her grey eyes sharp. You must destroy her heart. The thing she keeps hidden, her soul, locked away in something she treasures. As long as it exists, she will rise again. What does it look like? Graves asked. Ilse shook her head. It could be anything, a mirror, a bone, a gem. But it will be guarded, and finding it will not be easy. Graves thanked her and left, his determination hardening. If the witch had a heart, he would find it. That night, Graves ventured into the forest near Kroslova, following the stream where the child had vanished. The air was heavy, the trees whispering in a language he couldn't understand. As he moved deeper, he noticed familiar signs, clawed tracks in the soft earth, bone charms hanging from branches, and strange symbols etched into the trees. The path led him to a clearing, where the remains of a fire still smoldered. In its center was a single object, a blackened, cracked mirror. Graves approached cautiously, the iron dagger in his hand. The moment he touched the mirror, the air around him shifted, growing colder. A faint laugh echoed through the trees. "You seek my heart, hunter." Baba Yaga's voice taunted. "You'll never find it." Graves tightened his grip on the mirror. "We'll see about that." The mirror in hand, Graves returned to the village, hoping to study it further. But as he reached the edge of the forest, the ground beneath him began to shift. Roots sprang from the earth, coiling around his legs and pulling him back toward the trees. He slashed at them with his dagger, but they only tightened, their thorns biting into his skin. From the shadows, Baba Yaga emerged, her form twisted and monstrous. Her wild hair writhed like snakes, and her eyes burned with hatred. "You think you can take what's mine?" she hissed, pointing a gnarled finger at the mirror. "That's not my heart, hunter. It's your death." Graves raised the mirror, angling it toward her. The reflection caught her gaze, and she recoiled, shrieking as if burned. The roots loosened, and Graves broke free, sprinting back toward the village. Back in the safety of Victor's home, Graves examined the mirror closely. Its surface was warped, the edges jagged. But in its reflection, he saw something strange, a faint, glowing shape deep in the forest, pulsing like a heartbeat. "This isn't her heart," Graves realized. "But it shows where it's hidden." He turned to Victor's. "Stay here. Protect your family. I'll finish this." Following the mirror's guidance, Graves ventured into the forest once more. The path was treacherous, filled with traps, fallen trees, shifting ground, and bone charms that rattled ominously. Finally, he reached a grove unlike any he had seen. The trees were twisted and blackened, their bark glistening with an oily sheen. At the grove's center stood a stone pedestal, and atop it rested a small, ornate box. Graves approached cautiously, the iron dagger ready in his hand. The moment he touched the box, the air grew heavy, and Baba Yaga appeared, her form even more grotesque than before. "You dare touch my heart," she roared, lunging at him. Graves dodged her attack, slashing at her with the iron dagger. She screamed as the blade bit into her, but her rage only seemed to grow. With one hand, Graves opened the box. Inside was a single object, a small, black gem, pulsing with an unnatural light. Baba Yaga froze, her eyes widening in terror. "No," she shrieked. "You cannot destroy it." Graves didn't hesitate. He drove the iron dagger into the gem, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The moment the gem shattered, Baba Yaga let out an ear-piercing scream. Her form dissolved into ash, carried away by the wind. The grove around Graves began to wither, the trees crumbling into dust. Graves stumbled out of the forest, exhausted but victorious. The witch was gone, for good this time. As he returned to the village, the air felt lighter, the fear that had plagued the people finally lifting. Graves didn't linger. His work there was done, but he knew that somewhere, another mystery waited. For now, though, the children of Latvia were safe. As Detective Elric Graves sat by the fire in Victor's home, the warmth seeping into his weary bones, his thoughts drifted to his past. The ordeal with Baba Yaga had stirred memories of his youth, of the lessons imparted by his mentor in the arcane and supernatural, Professor Oswald Farrow. Farrow had been a brilliant but enigmatic figure, a man who believed the line between myth and reality was far thinner than most were willing to accept. Graves had been a young man then, skeptical but eager to learn. One evening, in Farrow's dimly lit study, the professor had told him about his first encounter with Baba Yaga. "I was no older than you are now," Farrow had begun, pouring a glass of dark brandy. "It was deep in the Russian wilderness, during the harshest winter I'd ever known. Villagers spoke of children disappearing, lured by promises of sweets and toys." Graves had leaned forward, captivated. "What did you find?" Farrow's eyes had grown distant. "Not what I expected, nor what I wanted. The witch isn't just a creature, Elric. She's a force, a storm of hunger and cruelty wrapped in human shape. But she's also cunning, and that's what makes her so dangerous. She doesn't just take, she makes you think you've given willingly. Those words echoed now in Graves' mind, as vivid as the fire before him. The second time Pharaoh spoke of Baba Yaga, he had been in a darker mood. Graves remembered the night clearly. A thunderstorm raged outside, and the professor's study smelled of damp earth and old paper. She doesn't appear to everyone, Pharaoh had said, pacing the room. You can't summon her with mere intent. She comes when the balance is disturbed, when sorrow, greed, or fear taints the land. And when she comes, she tests you. What do you mean by tests? Graves had asked, puzzled. Pharaoh had stopped, his face grim. She delights in games, Elric. If you're clever and brave, she might let you leave with your life. But if you fail, you're hers. Body, mind, and soul. Pharaoh had gone on to recount the midnight hunt, a moment during his first encounter when the witch had forced him to track her through a snow-covered forest. She was testing my resolve, Pharaoh had said. Each step led me deeper into her trap. But I remembered something my teacher once told me, never run toward the bait, always look for the source of the snare. How did you escape? Graves had asked. Pharaoh had smiled faintly. I didn't. I made a deal to save a child's life, and she let me go. But the price I paid, it's a story for another time. In his final lesson about Baba Yaga, Pharaoh had spoken with an uncharacteristic heaviness. He had gathered Graves and a few other students around a roaring fire, the flickering flames casting shadows on their anxious faces. The witch doesn't age, doesn't die, not in the way we understand, Pharaoh had said. But she can be bound, weakened, and driven away. To do so, you must understand her rules, for all things in her world have rules. What are her rules? Graves had asked. Pharaoh had stared into the fire, his voice quieter. The first is respect. No matter how vile you think her, you must never mock or underestimate her. The second is knowledge. If you don't understand what she wants, you'll never defeat her. And the third, he trailed off, his gaze distant. The third, one of the other students had prompted. Pharaoh had looked at them then, his eyes dark with memory. Be prepared to pay a price. She never leaves empty-handed. Graves had asked what price Pharaoh had paid, but the professor had only shaken his head. That's a burden I'll carry alone, Elric. But mark my words, if you ever face her, don't let your fear blind you. Fear is her ally, and she wields it with precision. Now, sitting by the fire in Victor's home, Graves couldn't help but wonder if Pharaoh had been speaking directly to him all those years ago, preparing him for this very moment. With a sigh, Graves rose and stared into the flames. You were right, old man, he muttered. She never leaves empty-handed.